So the Renegades and Ash Iron livestream has finished, with a bunch of information being given on both of those topics, as well as some information on quality of life changes and different things. I took some notes during the live stream, and I sort of wanted to go through my thoughts on the live stream as a whole and the different topics. I don't think it's going to work very well as a summary of what was discussed, really, because I didn't note down everything, but I did note down things which I thought were interesting. So the first thing is about Renegades, and the approach they've went for is what I assumed was going to happen, where yes, it is a Star Wars themed expansion, but is done in a Destiny way, which seemed to be what people were very, very worried about, understandably so, that it was just going to be Star Wars and Destiny. But it's basically it's a Destiny expansion, which is based around Star Wars, but nothing is just, oh yeah, that there's Star Wars. There's the likes of a ATST, that's what it is. There's the likes of an ATST, which has been remodeled to look like a Cabal Walker of sorts, which isn't too far away from what we already have in Destiny, because we have the Fallen Walkers already, obviously. So it's just a Cabal take on that, is how I would see it if it was outside of this Renegade Star Wars themed expansion. So I don't think it looks out of place. The lightsaber is, of course, the most blatant Star Wars thing in the whole expansion, but I'm willing to let that slide because it's a lightsaber, and having a lightsaber in Destiny would be cool. But it's called the Praxic Blade, apparently. So it seems to be a weapon which the Praxic Order use, and then there's also other elements. There's a blaster which looks like Han Solo's blaster in a way. It has functions the way that you would expect a Star Wars blaster to, where it doesn't really have ammo, it just overheats, so you have to worry about not shooting it too fast or whatever. And those are mechanics which are in Star Wars games, and like Battlefront has that, and you know, it's in other games. But it seems like a Destiny weapon. It's just a different take on the ammo system, which I think is welcome in Destiny because it already has a bunch of different things. But those were the most blatant Star Wars things that I saw. They're obviously trying to use Mars as a Tatooine type planet. Europa, I guess, is meant to look like Hoth a bit, and Venus is meant to look a bit like Dagobah. But all three of those planets still looked like the Destiny planet. It didn't, like, I didn't look at Europa and think that's Hoth. I looked at Europa and thought, that's Europa. Because there's still Jupiter in the background, there's still all of the aesthetics that Europa has. It's just a new location in Europa. And of course they've chosen that because it is an ice planet, which Hoth is. Mars is a desert planet, which Tatooine is, you know? So that's sort of how they've decided to go about it, which I think was the best option. I also think that, like, I thought that was how they were going to do it from the very start. I wasn't too worried about it being just Star Wars. Like, oh, we're going to go to some random planet and it's Tatooine, and it looks identical to Tatooine. There's clear inspiration, but I would say nothing is just copy-pasted other than maybe the lightsaber. But that's the way I sort of looked at it. There's a cantina inspiration in that there's a hub in Venus, which I wasn't too familiar with Venus because it's in Destiny 1, but there's a hub which is on Venus which has been repurposed to be used by different syndicates, and it has inspiration from the Mos Eisley Cantina from Star Wars, and it is very easy to see the similarities, but it is also done in a Destiny way, and whenever I see that, if it was outside of the Star Wars context, if I saw that, I would immediately think back to the Fallen Lost Sector beside Spider's Lair in the Tangled Shore, because it feels much more like that, which was a Fallen bar or club. It feels much more like that than it does a Star Wars cantina in my books. So I think they've done it very well. It's very faithful to the Destiny aesthetic and theme, while still managing to be themed around Star Wars in a way. So I think it was done very well. There are parallels. There's obviously the ones I talked about, but there's a new Cabal order, which I didn't manage to pick up the name because it sounded weird and I don't know how to spell it. But there's a new Cabal faction, which seems to be the Empire-esque faction for this expansion, and they seem to be putting the Praxic Order as the Jedi. I do think these are good choices. Having a new Cabal faction which is themed around the Empire just makes sense for if any Destiny faction is going to be Empire themed, the Cabal makes the most sense. It's the military faction essentially. So to have a proper military Cabal is quite welcome, I think, because I don't think we've ever seen the Cabal in their prime properly. The only peek into that we got was the Red Order, or the Red Legion even, and even with them, like, we demolished them, even being just a lone light bearer. So That was a more, I guess, grungy sort of approach to the war aesthetic for the Cabal, whereas this should be a lot more sort of clean and polished look, which the Empire tend to have. They also have like the black and white colour scheme and everything, which you see with the Empire, so that'll be very interesting to see. I'm assuming they're going to be using the typical Cabal thing of the clones and everything to get their numbers up. So I think that'll be very interesting to see. The Praxic Order being the Jedi is arguably more interesting. The Praxic Order have been present in Destiny for a long time, but we never actually got somebody in the game who's from the Praxic Order. It's just been sort of off in the lore somewhere. I think their first show was, or the first appearance was during Season of the Drifter, where Drifter was sort of going off in one way, and then you had to align yourself with the Vanguard or Drifter, and the Praxic Order got involved, and they weren't very happy with Drifter, and there was all this sort of stuff happening, so it's interesting that they're being posed as the Jedi, because yes, they always seem to be the sort of order-keeping part of the Vanguard, or the order-keeping part of the whole TAR operations, but we never saw them, and they also got painted in a bad light, I think, during Drifter, like Season of the Drifter, so it'll be interesting to see how that works. In addition to that, we also have Drifter in this expansion, so Praxic Order and Drifter being in the same expansion makes sense too, and it looks like at the start of the trailer, or the Vidoc, which they showed, that he was encased in, I'm assuming that this expansion's equivalent of Carbonite, essentially. So he was sort of frozen in a brick, which I'm assuming is meant to be that parallel. So it looked very interesting. Outside of the Star Wars comparisons and aesthetics, there's a few different things. We have a day-night cycle present on the locations, it seems. They talked about that very, very briefly, but it looks like whenever you launch one of the activities, it can be at several different points of the day. There can be different gameplay functions and everything, but the day-night cycle is a good thing to see come back, because I think that's been missing from the last few locations. I don't think Kepler has it, and the Traveler, like the Pale Heart, doesn't have it either. Light falls perpetually in, or New Moon is perpetually in darkness, so the last time we got a day-night cycle might have been Europa? Maybe more recent than that, not too sure. Yeah, Witch Queen also doesn't have a day-night cycle because it's a Throne World. So yeah, return of day-night cycle basically. So that'll be good to see. There's a few activities which they sort of talked about. The main gameplay loop seems to be that there's 3 syndicates. There's a Vex shoot-off, which is actually a shoot-off not from the main Vex collective, but from Maya's collective, which goes into the story of Ash and Iron, seemingly, which I'll get onto in a minute or two. But there's this sort of independent group of Vex, which is a syndicate in their own. There's a Fallen group of, there's a Fallen syndicate, basically, which seem to be like the biker gang type aesthetic, it seems. They don't align with like machines, they don't have a god, like a lot of other Fallen seem to have. They're just themselves. So biker gang, I think, is quite an apt description of that. Then the other one is a shoot-off of the new Cabal faction, which is quite interesting, with a Scion being their head person. So you seem to go to this like cantina place in Venus to talk to them all, and that's where you then get your abilities. So I think you get bounties from these syndicates to then go attack other syndicates, or maybe during the campaign it's only to attack the like Empire Cabal. But they were saying that once you complete the campaign, then there's a turf war which gets initiated, which means that you then pick up bounties for a syndicate, and then that goes against another syndicate. And then there seems to be some sort of activity where you can invade, as I'm assuming you pledge allegiance to like the Vex, and then there's another group who have pledged allegiance to like the Cabal group, and then if you go select this activity, you have to invade the Cabal group, like you would in Gambit, where you have to kill them and stuff, and then I'm assuming you get rewards for it. It seemed rather interesting, but it's an opt-in thing as well, because it does sound rather annoying. So you opt in to being allowed to do this Hitman invasion thing. So it all sounds very interesting. During these like bounties or Hitman jobs or whatever, you also get abilities, which are called Renegade abilities, apparently. They allow you to do things like summon in vehicles, whether it be the new ATST Cabal Walker thing, or a like just a Cabal, I forget the name of it, but the other vehicle the Cabal have, or you can call in like a Cabal drop ship, like drop ball pod thing, or an airstrike and stuff like that. So I looked at it and immediately thought score streaks from Call of Duty. But I think that's sort of the aesthetic they're going for, but I'm assuming it'll be a timed function where it'll have a cooldown. You can use it every so often, just like your grenade or your melee. They said it doesn't replace your grenade or melee or anything like that, or your class abilities, so it's just a purely additive thing. I look at it as this expansion's version of the ball from Kepler, from Edge of Fate, only this time it shouldn't be a gameplay, like, needed thing, it's just a bonus to help you play activities, is how I read it. Like, I don't think you'll have to summon a walker in to blow open a door, perhaps. Maybe if you're in a mission. I don't know. But anyway, that's sort of how they were describing it. So it all seems rather interesting. That was sort of all the information that I picked up, which was quite interesting. There's things you can do with the lightsaber, like throwing it. It seems like it sort of goes around in a circle. It does seem to be some sort of new archetype. I don't think it's a sword, but it is its own exotic weapon. So we'll see if maybe we'll get like legendary lightsabers at some stage, or praxic blades is what I should be calling them. But all seemed rather interesting. I'm quite hopeful. It does seem exactly what I wanted and hoped for, which is a Destiny expansion with Star Wars inspiration. It seems like something they could have made had they have just decided we want to make a Star Wars themed, like a Star Wars inspired expansion, without contacting Lucasfilm. I think they could have done basically everything that they're now doing, apart from maybe the lightsaber, without contacting Lucasfilm. So I'm quite happy with that. It looks pretty positive. So all good there. As for Ash and Iron, which is coming out today, which will already be out by the time this video goes up, some interesting bits of information. It turns out the 9-member cult 3 dying in the Edge of Fate will have effects on Earth, as in like gravity and how the planet functions, which I thought there might be something like that in the trailers, if something like that would happen. And like seeing 3 die, you sort of think like, okay, 3 is related to Earth. Will it have any effects on Earth? But it was never mentioned, as far as I'm aware. So this just sort of being talked about in a throwaway line during this live stream was pretty interesting. The overarching story seems to be that Maya has overextended herself with her abilities by killing 3, pushed her a bit too far. She's lost some control on her collective, and therefore she needs to gain control of Golden Age tech in order to expand her signal, basically. So the main goal seems to be to get the Warsat network, which is currently in the Plague Lands. So I guess it's maybe the only stockpile left of Warsats, with Rasputin having detonated all of the ones which were active. So that seems to be the theme of this season. The Fallen, which were in that territory, have been pushed out by Maya's group. It seems to be mainly comprised of the collective, the Nessian Schism, I think is what they're called, the Vex that she has, and also some Cabal, which they call conscripts, but they have the collars around their necks, so I'm assuming they've been compelled by Maya, and they've only got like, the Red Legion armor. There's a new territories activity, which seems to be similar to Overthrow with some Nether influences. So Overthrow is that activity from the Pale Heart where you go into a patrol zone and you go and do a bunch of activities around the place, get up to a score of 1,000, and it initiates the next wave. Except with this one, whenever you get to 1,000, you'll be put into your ship and taken over to the next location. You also get rewards like with Nether, where if you completed an activity, there's now a random chance whether or not you will get a few buffs you can choose from, and they seem to be pretty overpowered. The one example they give was one of the buffs allows you to be perpetually prismatic and overcharged, which sounds pretty cool. So we'll see how that works. But it seems pretty promising. I like the idea of it without having played it yet. So we'll see. There's going to be more data pads that are around the place. I'm conflicted on the data pads because they take you completely out of the game to read a message. And I almost feel like it would be better just to have... well, it wouldn't be better to have a lore book appear because that completely locks it away and most people won't read it. Having the voice actor read it out would be a bit more work than what they're willing to do, probably. The data pads are probably the best medium for just having lore located around the place, because lore books are too prohibitive where you have to open up a full menu to go see it at your own leisure, whereas the data pad will open it up for you. Having said that, that can be in combat, although I think they try to put it in like transition areas. So I don't know, I'm conflicted in data pads. I like them and I don't like them. Maybe I've just seen too many of them at this stage, I don't really know. And finally, for Ash and Iron focus stuff, the Iron Axe, as it's called, which I had noticed in the trailer and thought that it looked a bit too much like an exotic for it to not be an exotic. is in fact an exotic. So it seems to be the exotic that you get from the exotic mission. And it is, in fact, exactly what I said, where it is an Iron Lord's Axe, which has been infused with the Quicksilver nanites from Neomuna, and it looks really cool. I don't know what the functions are, but they confirm that that is what it is, and if you looked at the sort of tooltips and everything on the weapon inspect screen during the live stream, you saw that it was nanites and everything. They call it Quicksilver, so really quite interesting. I'm looking forward to getting that, and the new exotic mission, which goes live in October apparently, is set within like a Warmind bunker or something like that, and you have 3 of Keitel's Scions helping you out. So that's all very interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know how it's going to be. I guess I'll play it later on today, but it seems pretty good. And I'm sort of happy with the seasons being a bit dialed back in terms of mission, and instead being an activity with mission, like with dialogue thrown in and stuff like that. So I think it's more, I guess, story via showing instead of just start a mission and be babbled at for the entire time. One thing which they did improve, which I'm quite happy to say, is that you don't get auto-launched into the starting activity anymore. You get to select it from a node on, I think, the director or the portal. So that's good, because it used to be that even if you didn't have the expansion or you didn't even have the season, you would get launched into the first mission, and it was really, really annoying. Now that doesn't happen, so that's a really good improvement to see. There's also seemingly 4 events which are going to happen during this season, one of which is Iron Banner, then Arms Week, which we've seen before. Iron Banner we've seen for many years. Arms Week is a event which was during the season just past there, which seems to focus on like a certain type of weapon, and then it has like certain mods you can add to it. So the one they were talking about was shotgun focused, where you can add a mod to a shotgun to make them all shoot like Fourth Horseman, which, if you're unfamiliar, Fourth Horseman is a shotgun which has 4 shots in a mag, and whenever you fire them, they fire within like a split second of each other, so you can unload your entire 4 shotgun shots within a second, essentially. So doing that with any shotgun in the game would be very interesting. The other one then, there's Called Arms, which is the most interesting sounding one, and then there's a different one which I didn't really pick it up very well, and I haven't rewatched the live stream to find out what it's called, but there seems to be another event, which I think focuses on a certain activity or something like that. But this last event here, Called Arms, seems to be focused around the weapon foundries and the tower, so it seems to have Devrim K as the vendor or the liaison with the weapon foundries. He's going to be in the tower instead of in the Trosslands in EDZ, which will be quite nice to have Devrim not be in EDZ. So it's basically an event based around stress testing new weapons and gear. The crossbow, which is coming out with Ash and Iron, seems to be a focus for it as well, where there's going to be different perks and different rules of it you can get, it seems, and there's a hollow foil of it too. So I really do like the sound of this event, and I do really like that they are adding more events like this to the game. They're making them more regular things, but they're also not major events. They're not on the scale of Festival of the Lost or Solstice. They are just mini events, which you can play if you want to, but if you don't play it, it's no biggie. But it helps just seem like the game's more alive, I guess, having these events going on. The interesting thing I found here is that during the solo ops that you could play since the Edge of Fate, sometimes there's a line from Anna, which I think I've only heard once, where she says that the weapon foundries are looking to make new weapons, and they want to be able to stress test them, and that if there are any, that they'll be going to the Guardian, like us, first, because we've shown our like expertise with weapons and all this sort of stuff, which I thought was a bit of a throwaway line, or it's just one of those things you hear where it's like, yeah, that's happening, this helps to liven the world, but I didn't expect to see something come out of it necessarily. So it's quite interesting that that was teased in a activity line this season past, and it's going to come to fruition at the end of this coming season. So I guess keep it more of a listen out for the dialogue and solo ops and stuff, because it could be it's actually going to come into the game as an event or something like that. Some other things, Festival of the Lost seems to have 2 new activities. They didn't go very in depth with it, but one's PvE, one's PvP. They do seem to be, I got the impression that they are proper activities, not just like Solstice where you play a few featured activities and that's it. It does seem to be proper new activities, but I guess we'll see. It didn't seem like the haunted lost sectors were coming back. It seemed to be something different, but they didn't really elaborate. And then they went into a bunch of quality of life stuff as well, which I won't go awfully in depth about because I'll miss a bunch of stuff and I'll get things wrong. But the key takeaway here is it seems like Bungie have really realized that they messed up big time when it comes to a bunch of the new systems they implemented. For example, the featured gear system, which is you'll notice on different icons on weapons and armor that you have in your inventory will have like a blue banner icon over the seasonal logo. And what that means is it's featured. So you get certain buffs due to this. I don't quite know what it is really because I haven't properly been playing Destiny. But one of the things is it gives you a bonus in the portal. So if you wear, I think, mostly featured gear and use mostly featured armor or weapons, you will be able to go up a few extra light levels per reward drop, as opposed to if you didn't wear any, it would just be a very minor bump, which is something they're actually getting rid of, which I think is being gotten rid of in um, Renegades, perhaps. I'm not quite seeing it, but they did say they're going to get rid of that. Which is a good idea because it makes no sense to be like, right, you have to wear the featured gear and use featured weapons in the portal, where you also have to select certain things to get a certain score, which also correlates to how much of a power bump you're going to get, and it was just overly complicated. So they're rolling that back. They're also making all exotic weapons and armor featured gear, so you won't have to worry about, oh, I need to use Legend of Acreus instead of using this other thing because Legend of Acreus is the featured exotic. So they've done away with that, which is good. I'm quite happy they've done that because thinking about whether or not you should use an exotic because it's featured is another layer to the game which isn't needed. Now the dialogue that was said around the bonus for wearing featured gear in the portal was something where it was it was communicated. I think the term was it's not the right time for it was the impression I got. It was less we're not gonna do this and more it's overly complicated for doing it right now. So it almost seemed like what they were trying to say, maybe just to cover themselves if they reintroduce it into the future, was like, this isn't the right time for this. We might explore it in the future, which isn't necessarily a bad approach, but it was interesting that that was sort of the wording given, or the impression that was given. There were a bunch of nerfs which they had announced in different This Week in Destinies, which they have completely rolled back on, it seems. They've also said that they're gonna completely stop any balancing patches unless it is critical. And by critical, it basically means game breaking. So in the example of if you're able to two-punch a raid boss or something like that, that would be balanced. That would get changed. But other than that, if there's a weapon which is just performing better than a bunch of other things, but it's not like game breaking, they're gonna leave it alone for now. And they said the reason for it was so as they could reevaluate their process of giving a nerf or a buff, and just to make sure they make the right choices in the future, which I think is good because they seem to they have a community opinion of just seeing something outperforming a bunch of other things and the immediate action is bad, like nerf hammer, instead of taking a second to reflect and be like, perhaps it's not that this one weapon is doing way better than the rest and therefore we need to nerf it. Perhaps it is that everything else is doing worse than this thing and this is the only usable thing, therefore we should buff everything else. So good that they're doing that. There was a bunch of portal things that were going to change as well, which was new raid and dungeon drops are going to baseline drop at tier 3. This starts with the epic raid, which comes out this season, which was a good change to see. I don't really play raids, but that's good to see, at least for dungeons. And it does make sense for raids to drop that sort of loot. Renegades activities will work for the power climb, which basically what that means is any activity you play in Renegades should work for climbing your power level, which quite honestly the fact that wasn't the case in Edge of Fate is just silly, so at least they've changed that. They are going to be buffing non-solo ops rewards instead of nerfing solo ops, so that's what I just said, where if something's like performing other things, they typically nerf it, whereas in this case they've seen the feedback now from saying they were going to nerf it to now they're like, we won't do that, we'll instead just buff everything else. There's going to be things called Vanguard orders, which honestly seem like a bounty page, but I'm sure that'll need studied a bit more. And they are looking into other things, like there's dungeon layers, which are getting added this season, which is a way to have old content from dungeons come back in a bit of a better way. And they're looking to add legacy raids and dungeons to the portal and for the reward system, and eventually refresh the gear, but it's not quite a priority because that takes quite a lot of work, which is understandable. So a lot of changes. It all sounds pretty good. The overall sentiment I got from the quality of life section is that they have messed up royally, and they've realized this. And this is a known thing with Bungie, where they will do something, maybe they'll release something a bit early, and we end up being the beta testers for it, and it makes it a horrible experience. And this has happened many, 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 many times during Destiny 2. Having said that, there's very few times where I've seen it that they've said they're going to do a bunch of like nerfs and buffs and stuff, and then a few weeks later they completely cut it. They're like, we're not going to do that anymore. And now they actually appear to be scrambling in a way to then get out like a roadmap before Renegades in order to be like, this is where we're going to be. So I think they've acknowledged at least that they're at a pretty dangerous point with the game and that they need to address it rapidly. And it's just interesting to see the behind the scenes curtain slightly of they are clearly scrambling to get something together, which is something you don't regularly see that from Bungie, because if they scramble, they tend to just cut all communication and be silent. So I'd say this is a bit of a positive change. Another thing which I just want to briefly touch on is that during Shadow and Order, which I don't know if that's the major update, I think that's the major update after Renegades, so it's in about 6 months' time, they're going to add the ability to improve legendary weapons via a new currency, which means, you know, you can get gear which is at like level 1 gear or tier 2 gear, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, but currently there's no way to improve them. So what they want to do is add the ability to bump a legendary weapon from like tier 1 to tier 5 if you really want to, which I think is a good thing. I can't believe that's not already there, because that's basically the idea of masterworking. That was the basic function of the Masterworks whenever that came out, and it had that ability, and there's other systems in Destiny 2 which have that sort of structure. So I think at the end of the day, there's a bunch of things that they just released with the Edge of Fate, and they were half-baked, and they're now looking to improve them in the next 6 months, essentially, which is good, but we need to not lose sight of the fact that Bungie have done this many, many, many times, and purely just the fact that they're now improving it doesn't excuse the fact that they released everything half-baked. So it's important to remember that. But overall, it seems all positive changes. I'm quite interested by the story of Renegades. I think Ash and Iron will have some interesting story. I'm really looking forward to the exotic axe that we're going to get during that exotic mission in Ash and Iron. And overall, I do really like the different events that are being littered around the seasons now, and a bit more of the show, not tell storytelling that they're doing now. So let's see how it goes. That was just my post live stream thoughts. Let me know if there's anything I missed, perhaps, down in the comment section, or if you have your own thoughts. But I'll leave a link to the live stream in the description if it's out. That's about it. So I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please consider leaving a like, maybe even subscribing, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye bye.